Now, I want to talk about this. People diagnosed with the condition ME, they're being invited to take part in the world's largest genetic study of the disease. Around 250,000 people in the UK are thought to be living with ME, which is sometimes known as chronic fatigue syndrome. It causes symptoms including pain, brain fog and extreme exhaustion, which doesn't improve with rest. No one knows what causes the disease, and there are currently no diagnostic tests or effective treatments. Sian Leary from Sheffield has lived with ME for 10 years. She told me her story.
For me, I first got ill when I was 16 years old. I had surgery, and then a couple of weeks later I got tonsillitis, and I just went down. So I had about 6 months off school and, had a really difficult time with a huge amount of exhaustion. Just everything I tried to do, I would then feel more ill after doing it, which was really hard. But I then seemed to recover fully. And so I got about 2.5 years of being well and loved my life, went off to university, had a fantastic time. And then I got ill again. I got sinusitis and it just took me out. And I've never recovered from that. So I'm 29 now. So I'm coming up to 10 years of being really quite severely ill.
And what does it feel like to live with this?
There's been lots of symptoms for me that have been incredibly debilitating. I think when I was first getting ill, it was just the heavy feeling in my limbs was so intense and constant. And the big thing is that every time I tried to do something, I felt more ill. For me, there's also been a lot of pain, which has been really hard. And then noise sensitivity has been incredibly debilitating.
I wanted to ask, how does it impact your life? What aren't you able to do that the average 29-year-old would be able to do?
There's loads of things. I can't go on evenings out easily with friends. I think, I have lost a huge number of my friends because of this illness and because I don't have the energy, don't have the capacity to maintain those friendships. Things like walking into town from where I live, that should be easy, that should be doable. And it's absolutely not. And I'm quite a lot better now than I used to be. But in my early 20s, I couldn't stand up for long enough to brush my teeth. So my mum brought me a toothbrush in bed every night. It was horrendous. And, the grief that goes along with it is massive because I loved life. I was, active, played table tennis, cycled to university, got involved in activism and, worked loads of different things. And all of that kind of went overnight for me when I was 19 years old. So, yeah, I've now spent almost all of my 20s being cared for by my mum, which is not what you expect from life at all.
And what have doctors told you about the reasons, the causes of ME, and have you been offered any treatment that works? What has it been like engaging with the medical health profession?
It's been difficult, would be the simplest way of putting it. I was initially told that therapy would help me, and I absolutely went with that and tried the best I could, but it made absolutely no difference. There's been very little on offer, really, from the NHS, and that's been hard. It's always been me that has had to push for something else to be done. But honestly, there is very little that can be done. And I think I've been very lucky to improve. But, I'm still a hell of a long way from what I want to be and from what my peers are. And there's so many things I see them doing, working full-time jobs and being able to go out in the evenings and dating and loads of other things that are mostly beyond me.
Do you think that the perception of ME has changed since the pandemic? Do you think there's been a shift in perception?
Yeah, I think there has been a change since the pandemic started. And I think it's been gutting for a lot of people with ME. At the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of us said we can see a whole wave of new people getting ill. And I think we're seeing now that about half of people with long COVID are meeting the criteria for an ME diagnosis. And because we haven't had that research base there for a long time, because we haven't had that money invested into this disease to try and understand it, we have very little to offer the thousands or hundreds of thousands of people getting ill post-COVID now. And I think that's been really sad to watch.
We are talking to you today, though, because of this new worldwide study. What difference could this make, do you think, in the future? And I suppose how does it feel to know that this study is actually going to be taking place?
So yeah, Decode ME is, I think, a bright light in a sea of darkness. It's, for me, incredible to have the opportunity to take part in research, because it's not something I've had in 10 years of illness. And, from a kind of selfish, personal standpoint, I want to take part in research because I want there to be a treatment and a cure in my lifetime. But I also don't want to see other people go through what I've been through. And so if, people can use my experience, my DNA to create something better for other people, that will give me great joy too. And I think, yeah, Decode ME is the first really big, well-funded research project in the UK that is giving hope to people with ME. And that's just been amazing.
Sian Leary.
It's amazing.
Sian Leary from Sheffield telling me about her experience of living with ME. She's going to be taking part in this new Decode ME study, and we're going to be hearing from the study's lead researcher later in the show. Now, earlier you heard Sian Leary from Sheffield. She's lived with ME for 10 years and was appealing for people to take part in a groundbreaking study into the disease. It's called Decode ME, and we'll look to see whether a person's genes makes them more likely to develop conditions like ME and long COVID. Professor Chris Ponting is from the University of Edinburgh. He's going to be heading up the project. I spoke to him a little earlier.
The DecodeME team is looking for the small differences in DNA that distinguish people with ME from the general population. We're doing this because almost nothing is known about ME. We don't know what causes it, we don't know how to diagnose it, and we don't know how to treat it effectively. And with all of that lack of knowledge, we need to look everywhere in our genomes to find what is going wrong, and then to suggest research projects and tailored drugs and repurposed drugs that might help people with ME in the future.
How much of a difference has the pandemic and long COVID made to, I suppose, the perception and the feeling of urgency that something needs to be done and more needs to be understood about post-viral conditions like ME and long COVID?
So long COVID obviously is a devastating disorder. It affects 2 million people in the UK. Its effect on ME, I think, is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is given legitimacy from some to people with ME. On the other, it might be considered to be drawing attention away from people who have experienced ME symptoms for many decades. And because people with long COVID can recover quickly within a year, many don't, I understand that, but can, there might also be a preconception that people with ME should be recovering when actually they've been experiencing these symptoms for many years.
You said we know very, very little about the causes of ME and can offer, as a result of that, very little treatment or therapies. What do we know? Do we have, are there sort of theories regarding why it happens and the causes behind it, working theories?
Clearly, most people report having had an infection before they then have ME symptoms. And so that means that there is a trigger. But why do people sometimes recover and most often recover, and some do not recover? That is the main question. So there are many theories, and many scientists have investigated those theories. The trouble is that when findings have been made, they tend not to have been replicated. So that this means that we don't have anything solid upon which to base our future science. And this is why we're doing the genetic study, because it will provide a comprehensive look at everything that could be going wrong and asking what is actually going wrong, because then we can tailor our experiments appropriately.
What does being involved in a genetic trial involve then?
We are asking tens of thousands of people up and down the country who have been diagnosed by a health professional to get involved, to do the survey, to tell us about your symptoms, so that we can hear about the lived experience of people up and down the country, and from as many people with ME as possible. That is part of our advocacy. We'll take that information and distill it so that we have accurate information about people with ME in the UK for our policymakers. Then, like any other study, we will be able to identify people who we will then send a spit kit. Not everyone will get a spit kit, And people then will spit for science, provide their DNA with their informed consent. And it is then the DNA that will be then analysed, and we can determine what are the differences between people with ME and others. That will then give us the leads for the future and accelerate this research. This is the important thing. We need not to do science at the same rate as before. This needs to accelerate, and accelerate now.
What's been stopping people really getting to grips with this as a condition? Has it been prejudice regarding it, preconceptions, misunderstandings about it?
It's a very difficult illness. It is a hidden illness from many. Some people don't let on that they have an ME diagnosis, and that's absolutely right for them to do so. So there is prejudice against people with ME, but less so. That's declining, which is fantastic. But there's prejudice across the whole of society, and a great degree of uncertainty about why people have ME. We, as I said, we don't know the causes. We don't know how to effectively treat it, and that makes it really hard for medical professionals to deal with individuals who are completely underserved by the health system at the moment. So it's a very complex area.
And if people are listening and they've had a diagnosis of ME and they would like to take part in the project, what do they need to do?
We need everyone in the United Kingdom to know about DecodeME. We would love to have people with ME over the age of 16 who live in the UK to sign up at decodeme.org.uk. And we want to hear about your experience. And there is a survey, a questionnaire that you will then fill in. But we'd also love people who don't have ME to talk about it, to reduce the stigma that people feel if they have ME. And then with more people talking about it, not just will we reduce stigma, but we will get more people involved in this study, because this isn't merely a scientific project. This is a partnership, a co-production with people with ME. We are the scientific wing of the people with ME and ME charities. And so the more that everyone knows about what we're doing, the better.
That was Professor Chris Ponting telling us more about the new genetic study into ME.